yesterday's news.
Hello, welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers and manuscripts of yesterday. I say manuscripts because this last couple of weeks we've been changing things a little for various reasons, partly to ring the changes perhaps, and going back further than perhaps we might do via the annals of the papers. In this case, quite a lot further, 1405. There weren't too many newspapers around then, but there was a Lord of Mann, then as now. There were calls for better justice, perhaps then as now. And Scots were expelled. Perhaps, happily, they're not anymore. But this is from the wonderful Here is the News, an illustrated Manx history done by the late, great Terry Kringle, of course, erstwhile the history man here on Manx Radio. So in his news of 1405, Terry notes that a new Lord of Mann was appointed. The court of King Henry IV in London today announced the appointment of a new Lord of Mann to take effect later this year. He's 55-year-old Sir John Stanley, head of an English noble family with extensive lands and estates in Staffordshire. Not that close to the island, is it? Little is known in the Isle of Man about Sir John, but he's understood to have rendered sterling service to the Crown of England, serving in Aquitaine and in Ireland over the last 20 years and also on the Welsh and Scottish borders. The appointment will consolidate English control over Manx affairs, now that the Scots have conceded final defeat. But the Lordship of Mann is no sinecure. William the Scroope, Earl of Wiltshire, who held office from 1392, was beheaded by order of King Henry on the latter's accession 6 years ago. His successor was the Earl of Northumberland, who was displaced last year on being accused of high treason. It was all going on then, I tell you. Sir John Stanley, however, appears to have the King's full confidence. The gift of the island has been made to him on the simple condition that he does homage and gives 2 falcons to succeeding kings of England at their coronations. Seems pretty cheap, doesn't it? Sir John is unlikely to visit the island during his reign, and he will appoint a governor or captain to represent him. Well, that's still going on. A spokesman for the Keys said it was hoped that the stabilisation of civil control will enable the state to get back some of the immense power now held by the church in the island. He said the power of the ecclesiastical barons, like the Bishop of Sodor and Man and the Abbot of Rushen, one still going, one not, was too great and allowed the Pope clear domination of the island. It's expected John will consider having Manx laws written down in future instead of the Deemsters and Keys having to administer them from memory. It is the fact that the Church has had its laws in writing since Bishop Simon's synod at Kirkbraden in 1229, and that has given the Church ascendancy over the state for so long. Meantime, there were calls for better justice. Social reform groups in the island calling for a major overhaul of the administration of justice. They wanted alleged offenders and wrongdoers to be called for trial in future by what is described as God and the country. In practical terms, this is talking about trial by jury. The reform group says the time is right for abolishing trial by ordeal and combat. Oh, I don't know, I think we should bring it back, which has been in existence since Viking times. The friars, the oratory that is, established by Franciscan friars in the south of the island some 32 years before 1405, appears to have closed down. The buildings they occupied at the village of St Columba in Arbury are now deserted. But of course, St Columba, think Lay Columcille and such like. Some of them have been taken over and incorporated into the small holding that's to be known as the Friary Farm at Ballabeg. And I think you will still find a Friary Park there. Some of the friars are understood to be still on the island, but for how long is unknown. The Franciscans are known as Grey Friars or Begging Friars because of the non-ownership of property, and they set up their main oratory for 12 brethren in 1373. It is thought that they hoped to rival in influence the Cistercian monks at Rushen Abbey. there was a compulsory military service going on. Officers and men from Lancashire, North Wales and other of the Stanley strongholds have been brought to the island to strengthen the defences of Castle Rushen. At the same time, it was announced that compulsory military service is to be reinstated in the Isle of Man. I wonder how that would go down now, although it has been in the offing in the news in recent months. All men aged 20 to 26 will have to train as militiamen under the parish captains. They will also have to kit themselves out with bows and arrows, sword and buckler at their own expense. Well, that'll go down well. And finally, Scots to be expelled. It also used to be held that you could shoot a Scotsman on sight on the Isle of Man if he was wearing his kilt. Well, in 1405, a new law drafted to counter any further Scots attempts at infiltration of the island. Under the law, all Scotsmen on Manx soil would be obliged to take the next boat home to Scotland on pain of forfeiture of their goods, along with a period of imprisonment. Before the English crown gained its present supremacy over the Scots following the long struggle for control of the island, it had been suggested that Scotsmen should be shot on sight, but the Deemsters have ruled against this. So it never really existed at all. They might have been imprisoned and had all of their goods swiped, but not shot. A brief look at some of the news in 1405. If you manage to cast your mind back. The wonderful words of Terry Kringle. It's amazing how some items of news remain current over the years and years and years, isn't it? Whether that's justice or talking about the Lord of Mann. It is, as they say, all old news. Very old news in this case. There'll be more next week, of course. Don't forget to check out the podcast. Until then, cheerio.
You're gonna be yesterday's news.